There are places, objects, and civilizations that challenge everything we believe we know about our past. Mysteries buried beneath the earth, submerged in the sea, forgotten by time, and which science has not yet been able to explain. For the next 2 hours, I invite you to travel through the most puzzling enigmas of ancient history. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, and let yourself be carried away by the unknown. Megaliths of Baalbek, the impossible stone blocks. In the heart of Lebanon, in a region marked by history, war, and the ruins of ancient empires, stands one of the greatest enigmas of ancient engineering, the Megaliths of Baalbek. Today, the site is known for housing large Roman ruins, especially the Temple of Jupiter. But beyond its towering columns, what truly confounds the mind are the stones upon which everything was built. A group of gigantic blocks, fitted together so precisely that they seem to defy time and logic. 3 of these blocks, known as the trilithon, each weigh between 800 and 1,000 tons. This is no exaggeration. We are talking about stones over 20 meters long, each weighing as much as 3 fully loaded Boeing 747 airplanes. And yet, there they are, placed side by side, without cranes, without engines, without modern technology. No one knows how. Just a few meters away, in the ancient quarry, lies another even more colossal stone. The stone of the pregnant woman, a carved rock that was never moved, measures over 20 meters in length and weighs around 1,100 tons. For decades, it was thought to be the largest in the world. But it is not. In the year 2014, archaeologists discovered, beneath it, yet another stone larger still, more than 1,200 tons. Carved, ready, and completely unexplainable. The first thing that stands out is the size, yes, but what truly puzzles experts is the detail. The cut of the stones is clean, the surfaces are aligned with a level of precision impossible to achieve without advanced tools. There are no signs of heavy blows, no visible marks from manual tools. There are no records explaining the process, no documents, no chronicles of how, who, or why this stone monstrosity was built. The official version claims that the Romans built the temple on top of a pre-existing platform, made by earlier cultures. Some archaeologists believe it was the Phoenicians. Others claim it was the work of the Canaanites. But the truth is, no one agrees, and no archaeological remains found nearby show any evidence of a technology capable of moving such stones. The surrounding terrain does not help either. From the quarry to the temple lies an uneven slope. There are no ancient roads, no rails, no traces of heavy engineering. Traditional theories mention wooden rollers, but in that region there are no trees large or strong enough to support such weight. How many people would it take to push 1,000 tons across uneven ground? Thousands? Tens of thousands? Even with that human strength, how do you lift those stones and place them with surgical precision? The numbers do not add up. The theories do not either. Some modern engineers have attempted to replicate the process using basic technology and manual labor, but they all agree, without industrial cranes, the transport and placement of these stones is practically unfeasible. Yet still, they are there, and no one can explain it. With time, and in the absence of answers, bolder hypotheses have emerged. Some speak of lost knowledge, advanced technologies that vanished with ancient civilizations. Others propose the use of acoustic vibrations, a kind of resonance that would allow heavy objects to be moved without direct contact. And of course, there are those who point to more radical theories. Non-human civilizations, visitors from other worlds, unknown builders who came, constructed, and left. Fantastic? Perhaps. But Baalbek leaves the door open because no conventional explanation can close it. Beyond the technical mystery, there is a symbolic question. Why such massive blocks? If the goal was simply to create a solid base for construction, smaller blocks could have been used, as was done in other civilizations. Was it a show of power? A structural necessity? A ceremonial act? Or was it simply something they could do because they had the knowledge? Baalbek has been inhabited for millennia. It was known as Heliopolis, the city of the sun, during the Greco-Roman period. But even before that, it was already a sacred place. Local legends speak of a city built by giants. Some ancient accounts associate the site with the Nephilim, the powerful beings mentioned in biblical texts, half human, half divine. These are not proofs, but they also cannot be dismissed. Among the ruins, there are no inscriptions explaining the purpose of the blocks, no ownership marks, no names. There are no hieroglyphs, no symbols, only stones, giant, silent, but impossible to ignore. Some recent studies have used three-dimensional scanning, drone analysis, and modern technology to study the site. The results have been impressive in terms of construction precision. But the essential questions remain unanswered. How were they moved? How were they placed? Who made that decision? And for what purpose? Compared to other wonders of the ancient world, Baalbek stands out for one key reason. No one claims it. The pyramids, the Mayan ruins, the Inca cities, all have a culture that is associated with them. Baalbek does not. Its true origin remains shrouded in mist, and that makes it all the more unsettling. The site has survived everything: earthquakes, looting, wars, invasions. It has witnessed religions, empires, and entire civilizations come and go. But the blocks remain, immobile, inexplicable, as if they were part of a greater story, one we only know through fragments. When one looks at those stones, so enormous, so precise, so out of place, the mind searches for an answer. But there is none. All that is left is to accept that there are things we still do not understand, and perhaps never will. The megaliths of Baalbek are not just a historical curiosity. They are a slap in the face to our modern arrogance. A reminder that the past was not always primitive, that there was knowledge, methods, decisions that we cannot replicate today. And if we ever knew how it was done, that information is no longer with us. Only the stones remain. Piri Reis Map, the impossible map of the 16th century. In the year 1929, during a routine cleaning at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, a group of Turkish researchers came across a peculiar object forgotten among the shelves. It was an old map, drawn on gazelle skin, with faded inks but still legible lines. At first glance, it looked like just another ancient map. But when the experts began to examine it closely, something did not add up. The map, dated 1513, was signed by Piri Reis, an admiral of the Ottoman Empire, a respected cartographer, and the author of several nautical texts. Piri Reis himself explained in the inscription that he had compiled his map using various ancient sources, including Portuguese, Arab, and some ancient Greek maps, which he claimed dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. So far, it was interesting but not extraordinary. The extraordinary part came later, when the map was studied in detail. The fragment discovered showed the western coasts of Europe and Africa, part of the South American continent, and something more. At the southern end of the map, where one would normally expect to see an empty space, since Antarctica was not officially discovered until the year 1820, there appeared a large stretch of land. This landmass was not covered in ice. It showed mountains, rivers, and a detailed, jagged coastline. The most puzzling aspect was its shape. It matched almost perfectly the outline of Antarctica if its ice layer were removed. This detail shook the scientific community. How could a 16th century admiral have mapped, with such accuracy, a continent that was officially unknown, and that has been covered by ice for more than 6,000 years? In the year 1960, the map drew the attention of Professor Charles Hapgood, an American academic with unconventional ideas about geographic history. Hapgood studied the map thoroughly and compared it to modern models. In collaboration with officers of the United States Air Force, he analyzed its projection, the accuracy of the coastlines, and the overall layout. They reached a troubling conclusion. The map appeared to be based on a cartographic model using spherical projection, as if its creators had known the Earth was round, centuries before that idea was widely accepted. But the most surprising element remained the representation of Antarctica. Hapgood proposed that the Piri Reis map had not been drawn using the knowledge available in his time, but had instead been copied, perhaps over generations, from much older maps. He suggested that a prehistoric civilization, equipped with advanced nautical and astronomical knowledge, had mapped the continent before it was covered by ice. An idea that, of course, contradicts much of what we believe we know about human history. This theory is not based solely on visual speculation. Hapgood pointed out that glaciers began covering Antarctica more than 6,000 years ago, and that the current ice sheet is over 1 kilometer thick in some regions. This means that if the Piri Reis Map truly depicts an ice-free Antarctica, it must be based on extremely ancient information, collected in an era when, supposedly, humanity had no ships capable of such long journeys, no tools to make complex astronomical observations, and no knowledge of spherical trigonometry. Besides Antarctica, the map contains other oddities. The shape of South America is stretched eastward, unusually connecting with Africa. Some suggest this may be due to the projection used by the mapmaker. Others believe it is yet another sign that the original maps were based on a global view of the world, distorted only by later efforts to adapt them to the more limited nautical knowledge of medieval times. There is more. Historical records indicate that Piri Reis was not a marginal cartographer. He was an admiral with authority in the Ottoman Empire, respected for his naval skill and academic work. In his book Kitab-i-Bahri, a navigation manual, he shows great knowledge of the Mediterranean coasts, Atlantic islands, and ocean currents. He was no amateur. That is why his claim to have used ancient sources for his map carries more weight. He himself wrote that some of his documents came from times already considered ancient in his own era. Where did this information come from? What maps did Piri Reis consult? And who had originally drawn them? A fascinating theory suggests that there may have existed a civilization prior to those we know, older than Sumer, Egypt, or the peoples of the Indus Valley, which developed nautical, astronomical, and mathematical skills that were later lost in some global cataclysm. According to this view, ancient maps like that of Piri Reis would be surviving fragments of a forgotten global knowledge. It is not the only ancient map with anomalies. Other examples, such as the map of Orontius Phineas, that of Philippe Boich, or the map by Mercator, also show details of regions not yet explored at the time. However, the Piri Reis Map is the most famous, because it includes clear references to its sources and was rediscovered under verifiable and well-documented conditions. Skeptics argue that the supposed errors in the shape of South America and the inclusion of Antarctica may be due to cartographic confusion, scale errors, or the simple imagination of the author. But that explanation does not account for how geographical features were depicted that should not have been known, nor how such accuracy was achieved in a time of limited technology. Another possibility is that the map does not represent Antarctica at all, but some other land mistakenly interpreted as such. However, the outline, the position relative to Africa and South America, and the polar projection used have led even military experts to admit its resemblance to the ice-free Antarctic coast, according to topographic models obtained by radar. Piri Reis did not live long after completing his work. He was executed in 1554, accused of treason during a failed naval expedition. His legacy was lost for centuries, until chance brought his map back into the light. Since then, the document has been scanned, reproduced, studied, but never fully explained. It is only a fragment. Most of the original map has been lost. We do not know what else it showed, what other continents, coastlines, or symbols may have been drawn in its margins. All we have is that piece, that scrap of decontextualized knowledge that contradicts official timelines and silently warns us. Perhaps we do not know our past as well as we think. The Piri Reis Map is far more than an ancient object. It is a crack in the linear story of history, an artifact that forces us to rethink who we were, what we knew, and how much of that knowledge vanished into the darkness of the centuries. As it remains protected behind the glass of the museum, that piece of drawn skin still stares at the world with the arrogance of the impossible, like a silent witness of vanished civilizations, like a riddle that refuses to be solved. Göbekli Tepe, the 12,000-year-old site that changed history. In southeastern Turkey, not far from the Syrian border, lies a seemingly ordinary hill, unremarkable at first glance. Beneath it, under tons of earth and rubble, remained hidden for millennia one of the most important archaeological discoveries in human history. A place that challenges the chronological logic, that contradicts almost everything we believed about our origins as an organized species. That place is Göbekli Tepe. For a long time, it was assumed that civilization emerged in a sequential manner. First came the hunter-gatherer human, then the invention of agriculture, followed by permanent settlements, and finally, as a consequence of that stability, organized religion, temples, and monumental constructions. It was an accepted narrative, comfortable, coherent, until Göbekli Tepe was discovered. In the year 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt arrived at the site after colleagues had reported unusual formations. What seemed to be a natural hill turned out to be an artificial mound, covering a series of circular structures that had remained buried for thousands of years. What they found was not a village, nor a city, nor a cemetery. What lay beneath the earth was something entirely different. A megalithic complex estimated to be at least 12,000 years old. 12,000 years. This means Göbekli Tepe existed more than 7,000 years before the pyramids of Egypt, more than 6,000 years before Stonehenge, and several millennia before any other known temple built by humanity. In other words, it is the oldest place of worship ever discovered. And most astonishing of all, it was built by communities who, according to traditional history, were still living in small nomadic groups, with no writing, no developed agriculture, and no complex social structures. The remains discovered at Göbekli Tepe are impressive in both scale and detail. They consist of enormous T-shaped pillars, some up to 6 meters tall and weighing 20 tons, arranged in concentric circles. These pillars were not only erected with great precision, but many of them are decorated with bas-reliefs depicting animals of all kinds: snakes, foxes, boars, cranes, scorpions. The figures are carved with a technique that shows artistic skill, careful planning, and deep symbolic intent. Some pillars stand in the center of the circle, facing each other, as if marking a special point of focus. Others surround the perimeter, forming a sort of sacred enclosure. Nothing suggests that Göbekli Tepe was a permanently inhabited site. No remains of homes have been found, nor domestic areas, nor cemeteries, nor objects suggesting everyday life. There are no agricultural tools, no ovens, no traces of crops. Everything indicates that it was a ceremonial site, visited for a specific purpose, possibly religious or ritualistic. It was a place where people came from different regions, collaborated, participated, and then left. That is precisely what makes Göbekli Tepe so baffling. It does not fit the traditional model of human development. According to that model, societies could only build temples or monuments after agriculture and cities had been established. But in this case, the temple came first. And that changes everything. Some researchers now argue that it was the need to gather at places like Göbekli Tepe that triggered the development of agriculture. In other words, it was not food that brought the temple, it was the temple that brought food. To gather hundreds of people for weeks or months, they had to be fed. And that need may have sparked the domestication of plants, the organization of harvests, and the formation of more permanent social structures. In addition to its age and monumental scale, there is another detail that intrigues archaeologists. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried, around 8,000 years before the Common Era. After centuries of use, someone decided to cover it with tons of earth, stone, and debris. It was not abandoned by the passage of time or destroyed by a natural disaster. It was sealed, carefully filled in, and hidden from the world for thousands of years. To this day, no one knows why. No one knows who made that decision or what their motivation was. Was it an attempt to protect the site? A shift in beliefs? A symbolic act? No one knows. Only a small fraction of the site has been excavated. It is estimated that only about 10% of the hill has been uncovered so far. Ground-penetrating radar studies indicate that dozens of additional circles still lie beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. This means that what we have already seen may be only part of a much larger complex. A sacred city, perhaps, or something even more enigmatic. Some studies have attempted to find astronomical alignments in the design of the site. It has been suggested that the pillars may be aligned with certain constellations or celestial events, such as solstices or equinoxes. Others believe they represent mythical stories, cosmogonies that reflect the worldview of these prehistoric peoples. Whatever the case, it is clear they were not placed at random. Göbekli Tepe is not a pile of stones. It is a message carved in rock, a legacy we have yet to decipher. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe has had deep implications not only for archaeology but also for anthropology, the history of religion, and the general understanding of human evolution. If our Upper Paleolithic ancestors were capable of building such structures, what else were they capable of? How much knowledge was lost in the millennia that followed? And how many other similar sites remain buried, waiting to be found? Alternative theories have not been lacking. Some independent researchers have suggested that Göbekli Tepe was built with knowledge inherited from an earlier, now vanished civilization. Others speak of a mother culture, advanced and forgotten, that survived a great catastrophe, such as an ice age or a global flood, and left behind fragments of its wisdom. These are ideas that cannot currently be proven, but in the absence of definitive answers, they gain strength. Meanwhile, excavation work continues, slowly, with extreme care. Every new find at Göbekli Tepe not only illuminates a corner of the past, it also casts a shadow over what we thought we knew. Because if we were able to build temples 12,000 years ago, before writing, before farming, before cities, then perhaps our roots are far deeper, more complex, and more mysterious than we ever imagined. Göbekli Tepe is not simply the oldest temple in the world. It is an open wound in the official history, a warning that the past is not linear, nor simple, nor fully known. It is a site that reminds us there was a time, very distant yet real, when human beings were capable of great things, even before they called themselves civilized. And we are not finished discovering it. Rohonc Codex, the book no one can read. Around the world, there are ancient manuscripts that have fascinated generations of researchers, works that present linguistic, historical, or symbolic challenges. Some, like the Voynich manuscript, have gained global fame. But there is another book, much less known, just as enigmatic, and still resisting all attempts at decipherment, the Rohonc Codex. A book no one has been able to read. A message sealed in ink and paper, whose origins, contents, and purpose remain completely unknown. The Codex first appeared, at least officially, in the 19th century. It was donated in the year 1838 to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences by a nobleman named Gustav Bathyany, who had found it among his family's documents. At the time, no one knew where it had come from or how it had come into his possession. But its contents immediately drew attention. The book contains about 448 written pages and features more than 200 distinct symbols in a completely unknown script. Alongside the text are approximately 80 illustrations, drawn with a steady, stylized hand. The scenes depict human figures, landscapes, buildings, flags, crosses, strange objects, and, in some cases, events that appear to be religious or military. The illustrations are accompanied by the same mysterious symbols that run through the entire codex, as if they were part of a broader narrative. The alphabet used does not match any known writing system. It bears no resemblance to Latin, Greek, Slavic, Eastern, or Semitic languages. Some symbols seem similar to runic characters, others resemble shapes from the Glagolitic alphabet, but as a whole, it cannot be linked to any documented language. What is most perplexing is that it does not appear to be a random invention. There is structure, there is rhythm, there are repetitions and patterns. That is to say, all signs point to a real language behind it, but we do not know which one. Efforts to translate it began as soon as it reached the Hungarian Academy. Philologists, cryptographers, and linguists have analyzed it for over 150 years. All have failed. Some have suggested the text is written from right to left. Others believe it reads left to right. Some claim the writing has phonetic meaning. Others argue it may be a cipher based on an artificial or secret language. There are even those who believe the code can only be unlocked with an external key, some lost document that would reveal the text's meaning. For decades, the codex was dismissed by many as a forgery. It was thought to be an intellectual joke, an artistic calligraphy exercise without meaning, or even a deliberately confusing work. However, more recent studies have complicated that view. An analysis of the ink and paper revealed that the materials used date from the 17th century, ruling out a modern forgery. Furthermore, the pattern of symbols, their frequency, repetitions, spacing between words, and pauses show real, coherent linguistic structure. It is not gibberish. It is not a meaningless sequence. It is a real language, or at least one that was designed with a highly sophisticated internal logic. Over time, several theories have been proposed about the Codex's origin. One suggests that it may have been created by the ancient Magyar peoples, ancestors of the Hungarians. Another proposes that it was produced by a local religious sect, perhaps to conceal its teachings in a secret language. It has also been linked to the Renaissance scholars of Transylvania, a region that was once a crossroads of cultures, languages, and philosophical currents. But none of these theories have been confirmed, because the text remains impenetrable. The illustrations do not offer many clear clues either. Some appear to depict biblical passages or spiritual narratives, crucifixions, battles between soldiers with spears, scenes of baptism, prayers, figures in robes with radiant halos. But other images are more baffling. Buildings with impossible architecture, solar and astral symbols, figures that do not fit any Christian or Eastern context. The mix of the recognizable with the inexplicable reinforces the feeling that the Codex belongs to an intermediate world between reality and imagination. One of the most intriguing theories is that the Codex might have been a mnemonic work, that is, a text created to be remembered and passed on orally, using symbols to represent concepts, sounds, or ideas rather than conventional letters. This hypothesis could explain why the writing is so difficult to analyze using traditional methods. Perhaps it is not a phonetic language, but an ideographic system created for a very specific community. In recent years, some independent cryptographers have claimed to make progress in interpreting the Codex. One of them, Indian researcher Mahesh Kumar Singh, proposed that the underlying language could be an ancient form of Hindi. Another, Hungarian researcher Attila Nyri, suggested the book was written in a phonetically encrypted Hungarian dialect. However, none of these interpretations have been verified or reproduced by other specialists. The mystery persists. The Rohonc Codex is not alone in its strangeness. It shares certain traits with other enigmatic texts, such as the aforementioned Voynich manuscript, the Oralinda book, or the Phaistos disc. All of them share one essential characteristic. They are messages that, while visually legible, have not been decoded in terms of meaning. But among all these enigmas, the Rohonc Codex stands out for one reason. No one knows its intent. We do not know if it is a treatise, a diary, a chronicle, a work of fiction, or a sacred text. There are no external references to its content, no mentions of it in other works, no clues. Only that book, only those pages, only that language that belongs to no one. Meanwhile, the Rohonc Codex remains stored in the library of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. There, among other historical documents, it rests under controlled lighting, protected from time, waiting for someone to discover the key that will unlock it. Because what is certain is that the book contains something, and whatever it is, it was important to the one who wrote it. It is not a scribble, nor merely an artistic experiment. It was a serious, meticulous work, crafted with patience. And for some reason, its creator chose to write it in a way that no one else could read, or that only certain eyes might be able to. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the Rohonc Codex is not what it says, but what it implies. That there are still corners of our past where language, that tool we use to understand the world, becomes unreachable. And that even if we believe we have deciphered our history, there are still ancient voices that remain silent. And perhaps, just perhaps, that silence is not a mistake, but part of the message. The White Pyramid of China, the forbidden megastructure. Across the vast plains of Shaanxi province, in northern China, among gentle mountains, remote valleys, and cultivated fields, lies one of the most intriguing and enigmatic structures on the planet. It is not a secret in the strict sense of the word, but it has been systematically ignored, silenced, and even denied by the authorities for decades. Its existence raises difficult questions, and its story feels pulled from a science fiction novel or a forbidden archaeological chronicle. It is known as the White Pyramid of China. The first modern testimony of this structure did not come from an archaeologist or a historian, but from a pilot. In the spring of the year 1945, near the end of the Second World War, an American pilot named James Gossman was flying over China on a transport mission. According to his own account, while descending due to technical problems, he spotted a gigantic pyramid-shaped structure in the rural landscape of the Xi'an region. He made an emergency landing and, while repairing his plane, observed the colossal construction up close. He later described a perfectly symmetrical, white pyramid with a smooth surface, shining in the sun, and of proportions that, in his words, would make the pyramids of Egypt seem small. Years later, in 1947, another pilot, Maurice Sheehan, published an article in the New York Times confirming Gossman's story. The article even included an aerial photograph, blurry but suggestive, of what appeared to be a large pyramidal structure in a rural area. The idea of a giant pyramid in China began circulating in magazines, books, and radio programs, but soon silence took hold. The area was declared off-limits by the Chinese government, and for decades, all information about the subject vanished from official media. What is most perplexing is that pyramids in China do in fact exist, and that is no secret. In fact, the Xi'an region is home to more than 100 pyramidal structures, most of them eroded by time, covered in vegetation, and officially catalogued as burial mounds of emperors and nobles from the Han and Tang dynasties. Some have been partially excavated. Others remain sealed. But the White Pyramid, the largest of them all, the one from the pilot's accounts, does not appear in any official record. What makes this pyramid different is not just its size, which according to unverified estimates could exceed 300 meters in height, twice the height of the Great Pyramid of Giza, but the fact that it seems to have been deliberately erased from the official archaeological narrative. For a long time, satellite imagery was not available. Today, with tools like Google Earth, some independent researchers have located possible structures that match the historical descriptions, though the images remain inconclusive and do not allow for definitive claims. Beyond the mystery of its media disappearance lies the enigma of its construction. If the White Pyramid truly exists as described, who built it and for what purpose? Chinese historical records are vast and detailed. The annals of the emperors, the writings of dynasties, the imperial chronicles, none mention a structure of such magnitude. No emperor, no matter how ambitious or grand, claims credit for a work of that scale. And yet, it may be there, hidden among corn and wheat fields, concealed by time, censorship, and dust. Theories about its origin have not been slow to emerge. One suggests that the pyramid could date back to a time far earlier than any known Chinese dynasty, perhaps from a lost civilization that predates written history. Some authors have connected its possible existence to Eastern legends that speak of ancient sages, heavenly masters, or emperors who came from the stars. As fantastic as it may sound, these legends have existed for centuries and have always been wrapped in symbolic language tied to sacred mountains, celestial lights, and pyramid-shaped structures. Other theories suggest that it may have served as an astronomical center, an observatory, or even a point of alignment with specific constellations. In many ancient cultures, pyramids were not just tombs or monuments, they were sky-watching tools, stone calendars, markers of time. If the White Pyramid served a similar function, its size and orientation could have been key to understanding astronomical cycles, seasons, or the movements of the moon and sun. Some have proposed a more unsettling explanation, that the pyramid was not built by any known human civilization, but is a remnant of forgotten technology, a relic from a time in humanity's past that was erased by a global catastrophe. This view connects to theories about antediluvian civilizations, cultures that disappeared in an age when the Earth was very different, when the poles were in other positions and the seas had different boundaries. In the face of all this, Chinese authorities have generally maintained an ambiguous stance. The existence of some pyramids has been officially acknowledged, but no public access or independent investigation is allowed in certain key areas. Many local archaeologists are not even permitted to apply for excavation permits in those zones. The official explanation is that these are imperial tombs protected by law. But rather than easing doubts, this response has only deepened suspicion. In recent times, satellite images have revealed dozens of formations that could be pyramids partially covered by earth and vegetation, some with surprisingly symmetrical shapes. But the supposed White Pyramid, with its monumental dimensions and smooth, marble-like surface, remains elusive. Perhaps it was destroyed. Perhaps it is still underground. Or maybe it never existed as described, and the pilot's accounts were distorted by time and memory. But if that is the case, why all the silence? Why the decades of prohibition? Why deny what has not been definitively disproven? The mystery of the White Pyramid is not only archaeological. It is also political, historical, and cultural. It implies acknowledging that there are elements of our past that do not fit the dominant narrative. It means accepting that there are structures whose existence makes people uncomfortable, that perhaps we are not as certain of the boundaries of our own history as we believe. For now, the White Pyramid of China remains a symbol of the unresolved mystery, a sleeping giant, perhaps forgotten, perhaps deliberately ignored. And like everything that cannot be explained, it becomes legend, modern myth, a question mark that grows larger with time. Until it is excavated, until it is studied with rigor and transparency, it will remain just that. A possibility, a provocation, a vast shadow on the map of world archaeology. Longyou Caves, the underground enigma without builders. In the province of Zhejiang in eastern China, not far from the Chentang River and close to the city of Suzhou, lies a series of underground structures unlike anything previously discovered. Their existence remained unknown to the academic world for centuries, hidden beneath the surface of the earth, absent from maps and archaeological studies, until the year 1992, when a group of residents from the small village of Shurian decided to investigate a pond that had been part of the local landscape since ancient times. For generations, the villagers believed the body of water was a bottomless natural pool. That is what the local legends claimed, and no one had tried to prove otherwise. However, driven by curiosity, several neighbors began draining the water using pumps, something that had never been done before. What they found left them speechless. Beneath the water was not a natural cave, but a gigantic hand-carved structure. The walls were smooth, the corners perfect, the ceilings carefully carved with repetitive patterns. And that was just the beginning. That was the first of the Longyou Caves. It was soon discovered that it was not a single cave. In total, at least 24 caverns have been found, excavated into solid rock, spread across an area of approximately 30,000 square meters. Each cave has its own interior layout, but they all share a series of features that point to meticulous design, systematic execution, and, above all, a surprising level of technical knowledge for their time. The first thing that draws attention is their scale. Some of the caves reach depths of 30 meters. The ceilings are high, supported by internal columns sculpted directly from the rock. There is no rubble, no trace of tools, no signs of habitation. Everything appears to have been carved to last. The walls are covered in a pattern of perfectly etched parallel lines, as if someone had wanted to leave a uniform, almost decorative texture on every interior surface. But the most intriguing aspect is this. There is no historical record that mentions these caves. China, unlike many other regions of the world, possesses an unbroken and extremely detailed written history stretching back thousands of years. Imperial chronicles, dynastic records, ancient maps, administrative documents, architectural treatises. Yet nowhere is there any mention of the existence, construction, or use of these caverns. Who made them? When? Why? No one knows. There is also no definitive answer regarding their age. Modern dating techniques have been unable to determine exactly when they were excavated, as the removed material, the carved rock, is completely gone. There are no piles of debris nearby, no remnants of the extracted stone, which leads to another mystery. Where did all that rock go? How was it transported without leaving a trace? Calculations estimate that excavating just one of these caves would have required the removal of at least 4,000 cubic meters of stone. Multiplied by the 24 discovered caves, the figure becomes massive. It would have been a monumental task even with modern technology. And yet, there are no signs of ramps, cranes, carts, or even rudimentary transport systems. Another remarkable feature is that the caves are not connected to each other. Each was excavated independently, despite being extremely close together, in some cases separated by walls less than 1 meter thick. Still, the builders avoided piercing through to adjacent caverns, as if each one had an isolated or sacred purpose. This implies careful planning, knowledge of the terrain, and a clear intention, though today, that purpose remains unknown. Inside, no fossils have been found. No pottery, no tools, no human remains, no religious symbols, nothing to help determine their exact function. They do not appear to have been dwellings, nor tombs, nor conventional temples. The caves are empty, clean, immaculate, as if they were built for a purpose that did not require decoration or furnishings. Some archaeologists have suggested they may have been storage spaces. Others think they were ritual chambers. There are also theories proposing they were used as wartime shelters or water reservoirs. But all these ideas face the same problem: the total absence of evidence supporting any specific use. The wall carvings, composed of repeated diagonal lines, have sparked further speculation. Some theories suggest they could represent a visual code, a form of symbolic language, or even an architectural signature. Others believe they served a practical function, to prevent the walls from crumbling or to enhance interior acoustics. But none of these explanations have been confirmed. Attempts have been made to compare these caves to other ancient underground structures around the world. Examples such as the underground cities of Cappadocia in Turkey, the Hypogea of Malta, or the Ajunta caves in India have been brought into the discussion. Yet the Longyou Caves do not fit into any of those models. They lack the cultural markers, the architectural elements, and the known functions of those other complexes. They stand entirely alone in their style and in their mystery. The Chinese government has officially recognized the site's archaeological significance, and in recent years it has become a tourist attraction, though only part of the complex is currently open to the public. Research, for its part, advances slowly. There are many obstacles to a full excavation of all the caves, and the enigma remains unresolved. Among the boldest theories is the idea that the caves were built by a civilization predating all known cultures in the region, a society that left no written records, or whose traces were erased by time or by some cataclysm. There are also those who, without proof but with conviction, link these caverns to lost knowledge, forgotten technologies, or even influences beyond commonly accepted human history. Whatever the truth may be, one fact remains. Someone, at some remote moment in time, carved 24 massive caverns into solid rock without leaving any evidence of their existence. And that, in itself, is one of the greatest archaeological mysteries in Asia. The Longyou Caves are still there, silent beneath the earth, ignored for millennia, discovered by accident and challenging through their very existence. Our understanding of what human beings were capable of doing long before we believed it possible. The Black Sarcophagus of Alexandria. What was really inside? In July of the year 2018, the world briefly came to a standstill following news from Egypt. In the city of Alexandria, one of the cradles of Hellenistic civilization, a group of construction workers digging for a private development made a discovery that seemed lifted from an adventure novel. A massive black granite sarcophagus, sealed, intact, with no visible inscriptions, and cloaked in centuries of mystery. The discovery took place 9 meters underground in the densely populated neighborhood of Sidi Gaber. Alongside the sarcophagus, a weathered alabaster head was found, possibly a likeness of the tomb's occupant. But all eyes were on the sarcophagus itself, nearly 3 meters long, over 1.5 meters wide, and weighing close to 30 tons. Its very extraction was a logistical feat, but what truly sparked a media frenzy was the silence of its surface. No inscriptions, no hieroglyphs, no symbols. Just a dark monolith, hermetically sealed for over 2,000 years. Theories quickly began to spread. Some believed it could be the long-lost tomb of Alexander the Great, the legendary conqueror whose body has never been found. Others speculated that it might contain the remains of a forgotten pharaoh or a high-ranking member of the Ptolemaic dynasty. There were even dramatic warnings that opening the sarcophagus could unleash a curse, release an ancient disease, or trigger a string of unfortunate events. Social media flooded with comments that ranged from excitement and humor to genuine fear. For weeks, the sarcophagus remained sealed as Egyptian authorities prepared a careful opening procedure with a multidisciplinary team of archaeologists, engineers, and security personnel. Finally, on July 19th, it was opened under international scrutiny. What they found inside was nothing like what had been imagined, and in some ways, far more unsettling. Inside the sarcophagus were the remains of 3 human skeletons. The bodies were submerged in a thick, reddish liquid, a mix of sewage that had seeped through the stone and decomposition fluids accumulated over centuries. The stench was unbearable, the atmosphere toxic. But what drew the most attention was the chaotic state of the remains. They were not carefully arranged, as one might expect from a tomb of high status. There were no amulets, no jewels, no inscriptions. Just 3 skeletons piled together, fragmented, decayed. One showed signs of weapon wounds, suggesting a violent death. The initial reaction was disappointment. There was no gold, no nested sarcophagi, no funerary masks, no pharaohs, no kings, no legendary heroes. But what at first seemed like a hollow discovery proved, upon deeper analysis, to be deeply revealing. The fact that the sarcophagus had remained completely sealed for over 2,000 years was, in itself, an extraordinary archaeological event. In Egypt, most ancient tombs have been looted, violated, or reused over time. An untouched burial, especially of this size, is extremely rare. Moreover, the lack of inscriptions is highly unusual. In Egyptian tradition, even in later periods, it was common for tombs to bear some kind of marking identifying the deceased, invoking divine protection, or narrating their life and journey to the afterlife. Here, there was only silence. Further analysis revealed that the sarcophagus dated to the Greco-Roman period, probably between the 4th and 2nd centuries before the Common Era, that is, during the Ptolemaic era, when Egypt was ruled by the descendants of Alexander the Great's generals. The alabaster head found next to the tomb, though heavily damaged, bore more Hellenistic than pharaonic features, supporting the idea that the occupants may have been Greek nobles or local figures influenced by Hellenistic culture. Still, many questions remain unanswered. Why such a colossal sarcophagus for 3 individuals who apparently were not royalty? Why was there no record of their identities? Why such a crude internal arrangement within a structure so sophisticated in sealing and isolation? One theory proposes that the sarcophagus was reused, that it was originally intended for a single person of high status but, for unknown reasons, was later repurposed to bury 3 individuals hastily. Another hypothesis suggests that the bodies were placed together as a form of punishment, execution, or symbolic act. The fact that one of the skeletons showed blunt force trauma to the skull partially supports this idea. There was also an unexpected controversy. After the contents of the sarcophagus were revealed, thousands of people signed an online petition requesting that the red liquid be bottled and sold as an energy drink, claiming it contained the power of the ancients. Though clearly meant as a joke, the petition sparked a debate about respect for human remains and the modern fascination and morbid curiosity with historical mysteries. In any case, one thing became clear. Although the black sarcophagus of Alexandria did not fulfill the most extravagant expectations, it still added a valuable piece to the puzzle of late Egyptian history. And beyond its physical contents, the sarcophagus became a contemporary symbol of mystery, speculation, and the collective desire to uncover the extraordinary beneath the dust of the past. Alexandria, with its unique blend of Egyptian, Greek, Roman, and Arab cultures, remains a place where the known and the hidden coexist. A city that once housed the Great Library, one of humanity's most legendary centers of knowledge, and that continues to reveal secrets buried beneath its foundations. The black sarcophagus was one of them, but perhaps not the last. Devil's Bible, Codex Gigas, a supposedly cursed manuscript. Throughout human history, there have been books that intrigue not only because of their content, but also due to their physical presence, the aura surrounding them, and the dark legends woven around their creation. One of the most famous in this regard is the Codex Gigas, better known as the Devil's Bible. It is the largest surviving medieval manuscript, a work as colossal as it is mysterious, whose existence is steeped in rumors of demonic pacts, extreme penance, and forgotten secrets. The Codex Gigas was created sometime in the 13th century, probably between the years 1220 and 1230, at the Benedictine monastery of Podlasis, a small religious center in the region of Bohemia, now part of the Czech Republic. From its origin, the book drew attention not only because of its monumental size, but also for its unusual content, and one image in particular that still chills those who see it for the first time. The manuscript measures 92 centimeters tall, 50 centimeters wide, and 22 centimeters thick when closed. It weighs over 75 kilograms. It contains 620 pages, although it originally held 644, several of which were torn out or vanished without a trace. The parchment used to bind the book is believed to have come from more than 160 animals, most likely donkeys or calves, giving a sense of the sheer scale and labor required to produce it. The contents of the Codex Gigas are a blend of religious, scientific, and historical texts. Within its pages are the complete Latin Bible, both the Old and New Testaments, alongside works on medicine, exorcism, monastic penance, magical incantations, a calendar, historical chronicles of Bohemia, writings by Flavius Josephus, and extracts from the medieval Encyclopedia Etymologiae by Isidore of Seville. But what has truly immortalized the manuscript is a single, full-page illustration. A portrait of a horned, clawed, fork-tongued, grinning demon, the devil depicted like never before in medieval art. This image stands alone without explanation. It appears without context, placed between religious texts and prayers. The stark contrast between the sacred and the profane within the same volume has given rise to a legend that survives to this day. According to traditional accounts, the Codex Gigas was written by a single monk, known only as the condemned monk. It is said that after committing a grave offense, possibly heretical or sacrilegious, he was sentenced to be walled up alive, one of the most extreme punishments in medieval Europe. The monk begged for mercy and proposed a deal. Instead of dying, he would write in a single night a book containing all human knowledge of his time, from holy scripture to scientific treatises, and it would glorify the monastery that had taken him in. The superiors, intrigued or perhaps wishing to avoid a public execution, agreed. The monk began to write, but by midnight he realized the task was impossible. Desperate, so the legend goes, he invoked the devil and offered his soul in exchange for the manuscript's completion. The devil accepted. The book was finished, and as a gesture of gratitude, or perhaps as proof of his intervention, the monk included a portrait of the demon who had saved and condemned him. From a technical perspective, the legend seems implausible. But what continues to puzzle experts is that paleographic analysis confirms the entire manuscript was written by a single hand, that is, a single scribe. The handwriting is consistent, precise, and shows no signs of fatigue or ink variation. This suggests an extraordinary level of discipline, planning, and focus. It is estimated that a monk devoted exclusively to this task would have needed between 20 and 30 years of uninterrupted work to complete it. The Codex Gigas has had a tumultuous history. After its creation, it remained in Bohemia for several centuries. It was later taken to Prague Castle, where Emperor Rudolf II, famous for his obsession with the occult and esoteric sciences, kept it in his personal collection. Later, during the 30 Years' War, it was seized as war booty by Swedish forces in the year 1648, and since then it has been held at the National Library of Stockholm, where it may be consulted under strict conditions. Many have wondered about the purpose of such a book. Why compile such a variety of texts into one volume? Why include medical formulas alongside liturgical prayers? Why dedicate an entire page to the devil, something highly unusual in Christian tradition? And why is the manuscript surrounded by silence, torn pages, and unexplained gaps? Some scholars suggest the Codex Gigas was conceived as a kind of medieval total encyclopedia, an effort to concentrate knowledge into a single tome for monastic reference. But that explanation does not address the demonic element, nor justify the immense effort involved in its creation. Other, more symbolic interpretations propose that the book represents the duality of human knowledge: light and darkness, science and superstition, faith and sin, all intertwined in a single physical object. And then there is the myth of the curse. It is said that several people associated with the Codex died under strange circumstances, that its mere presence brings misfortune, that one must never stare at the devil's image for too long, that those who read the entire book are never the same again. None of this has been proven, but as with all objects surrounded by legend, fear feeds on its own echo. Today, the Devil's Bible remains safeguarded, digitized in high resolution, examined under ultraviolet light, and scanned for academic study. Yet no technology has fully uncovered its original purpose. The Codex Gigas does not answer. It does not explain. It simply exists. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part of all. It is a book burdened with centuries of speculation. One that survives through time not only because of its size or rarity, but because it represents a kind of knowledge that resists simplification. An object that forces us to confront the shadow of the unexplainable, to consider the possibility that even in a world obsessed with control and reason, there are still corners where the inhuman, the symbolic, and the sacred blur together. Perhaps that was the monk's true intent, not to build an encyclopedia, but to leave behind a threshold, a doorway to that which cannot be named, the disappearance of the Clovis people, a lost American civilization. Long before the Maya built their pyramids, before the Aztecs ruled the Valley of Mexico, or the Inca laid their roads through the Andes, there existed in North America a mysterious, sophisticated, and to some extent forgotten culture. Today, we know them as the Clovis people, a group that lived in ancient times during the final days of the Ice Age. But the most puzzling aspect of the Clovis is not their existence, but their sudden and absolute disappearance. The first evidence of this culture was uncovered in the 1920s, near the city of Clovis in the state of New Mexico, United States. There, archaeologists found remarkably advanced stone tools, finely crafted spear points, symmetrical blades, scrapers, and precisely designed cutting implements. These tools, especially the so-called Clovis points, were unlike anything found before. Their aerodynamic shape, the quality of their workmanship, and their design reflect a deep understanding of stoneworking and a highly effective adaptation to their environment. For decades, the Clovis people were considered the first inhabitants of the Americas, believed to have arrived around 13,000 years ago. The dominant theory claimed they had crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia into Alaska during a glacial period, when the continents were connected. From there, they would have moved southward, gradually spreading across the continent. But beyond their tools, little is known about their daily life. No extensive permanent settlements have been found, no temples, no cities. The Clovis seem to have been highly organized nomads, expert hunters who followed the great Pleistocene animals. Mammoths, mastodons, giant bison, and other now extinct megafauna. They moved across vast territories, leaving scattered traces of their presence as far apart as Alaska, Mexico, the eastern coast of the United States, and parts of southern Canada. Then suddenly they vanished. Around 12,800 years ago, the Clovis people abruptly disappear from the archaeological record. Their distinctive tools stop being made. There is no sign of a gradual transformation, nor of cultural fusion with other groups. What appears is a sharp break, a sudden absence, as if something had erased their footprint in just a few decades. What happened? One of the most widely debated theories suggests that the Clovis were victims of a catastrophic event. Some scientists support the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which proposes that a comet or fragments of an asteroid struck Earth around the same time the Clovis vanished. This event could have triggered massive wildfires, abrupt climate change, the extinction of megafauna, and, with it, the collapse of societies that depended on those animals for survival. Layers of charcoal, metallic microspherules, and melted glass have been found across the continent that match the proposed timeline. If true, this would have been a global-scale disaster. Another possibility is that climate change alone destabilized the ecosystem. At the end of the last ice age, temperatures fluctuated dramatically. Rainfall patterns shifted, rivers changed course, and many animal species went extinct. A society heavily reliant on hunting large game may not have been able to adapt quickly enough. Pandemic disease has also been considered, a spread of infection brought by migrants from other regions or through contact between previously isolated human groups. Without written records, this theory is difficult to prove, but it cannot be ruled out. A fourth idea suggests the Clovis culture never truly disappeared but was absorbed into emerging populations whose tools and customs differed. In this case, their legacy would have survived in diffuse ways, without leaving recognizable evidence of cultural continuity. However, this does not explain why Clovis points, so effective and advanced, were suddenly abandoned. Beyond their disappearance, the Clovis also continue to stir controversy for another reason. In recent decades, Sites older than Clovis have been found across both North and South America, forcing scholars to rethink the traditional timeline. Sites like Monte Verde in Chile, dated to over 14,000 years ago, or Bluefish Caves in Yukon, which may be over 20,000 years old, suggest the Clovis were not the first, but part of a much older and more complex process. This raises new questions. Did the Clovis arrive from the north, as long believed, or might they have come by sea, from Asia or Oceania? Could there have been even older migrations, leaving only fragmented traces behind? And if the Clovis were not pioneers, were they instead heirs to earlier cultures we have yet to uncover? What is clear is that the story of how the Americas were populated is far from fully written. The case of the Clovis is a powerful reminder of how little we truly know about the first chapters of human life on this continent. Despite their antiquity, they were a society with complex technical skills, deep environmental knowledge, and effective social organization. Yet they were erased by time as if they had never existed. The disappearance of the Clovis people leaves not just a gap in the timeline, but an echo, a sign that history is not a straight path, but a series of broken tracks. Sometimes those tracks vanish beneath the earth, sometimes under the water, and often beneath the layers of forgetting. Perhaps, in some remote place, new evidence still waits to be discovered that will shed light on the fate of these ancient people. But until then, the Clovis remain a civilization without a face, without a voice, only an enigma, still defying time. Stone spheres of Costa Rica, mysterious megalithic orbs. Deep within the tropical landscape of southern Costa Rica, nestled among banana plantations, coffee farms, and the dense vegetation of the Diquis River Delta, lie objects that seem completely out of place, not because of their size or color, but because of their perfect shape, their unknown origin, and the silence with which they have endured through the centuries. These are the stone spheres of Costa Rica, a collection of megalithic artifacts that continue to baffle archaeologists, historians, and explorers alike. These spheres, locally known as bolas de piedra or simply las esferas, first drew attention in the 1930s, when the United Fruit Company began clearing land to expand its plantations. Workers digging trenches in the area around Palmer, Sur began to uncover massive stone balls buried beneath layers of sediment. Some were completely hidden underground, others partially emerged from the soil, as if rising from beneath the earth. Stories of these strange shapes quickly spread throughout the region. What makes these spheres so extraordinary is not just their abundance, over 300 have been catalogued, but their nearly perfect spherical shape. Many of them are polished with a level of precision difficult to achieve even with modern tools. Their sizes vary significantly. Some measure just a few centimeters in diameter, while others reach up to 2.5 meters and weigh more than 15 tons. They are made mostly of granodiorite, an extremely hard igneous rock similar to granite. This stone is not found in the areas where the spheres were discovered, indicating that they were transported from quarries several kilometers away, at a time when there were no vehicles or cranes. The logistics of carving, moving, and placing these stones represent a significant technical challenge. And most puzzling of all, there are no written records, no detailed legends, and no direct evidence of the civilization that created them. The spheres are attributed to the Diquis culture, a pre-Columbian society that inhabited the region between the years 500 and 1500 of our era, just before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors. The Diquis left behind traces of villages, tombs, ceramic pieces, and stone sculptures, but no texts, inscriptions, or symbols that explain the exact purpose of the spheres. It remains unknown whether they were ritual objects, astronomical markers, symbolic representations of the cosmos, signs of social status, or something else entirely. Some of the spheres were found grouped in geometric patterns, triangles, straight lines, concentric circles. This has led to speculation that they may have served an astronomical or navigational purpose, perhaps aligned with constellations, solstices, or cardinal directions. However, many were removed from their original locations before they could be properly studied. During the 20th century, dozens of spheres were moved to private gardens, public squares, government buildings, and personal collections, losing the archaeological context that might have revealed their function. Another theory suggests the spheres served a territorial or ceremonial role, used by leaders or clans to mark sacred areas or zones of influence. The spherical shape may have symbolized perfection, totality, the heavens, or the universe. The absence of decoration, inscriptions, or carvings supports the idea that their pure form had meaning in and of itself. Spheres have also been found near tombs and funerary structures, suggesting a possible connection with rites of passage, commemorative practices, or representations of the soul. But once again, all of these remain hypotheses. Nothing in the existing evidence can definitively confirm or reject these interpretations. Over time, the stone spheres have given rise to numerous alternative theories. Some independent researchers have suggested the possibility of external influences, ancient seafarers, unknown navigators, or even lost civilizations that left their mark on this remote corner of the continent. Others, more daringly, have drawn connections to Atlantis, extraterrestrial visitors, or forgotten knowledge preserved in symbolic stone forms. These ideas have been dismissed by most academic archaeologists, who maintain that the spheres were the work of indigenous peoples with their own advanced techniques and cultural frameworks. Still, the lack of a definitive explanation has kept the more speculative interpretations alive. Today, the Costa Rican government has officially recognized the sphere's exceptional cultural value. Several sites where they were found have been declared UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and ongoing efforts aim to protect what remains of their original settings. Museums such as the National Museum of Costa Rica and the Finca 6 Site Museum house several spheres and document their history. Yet many spheres remain forgotten, scattered in yards and public spaces, treated as little more than curiosities. Despite the passage of time, the stone spheres of Costa Rica have preserved their mystery. They are silent objects that have never revealed their purpose, yet whose presence continues to inspire wonder. What began as accidental discoveries during agricultural work has become one of Latin America's most enduring archaeological enigmas. Their geometric perfection, durability, distribution, and symbolism make them a unique testament to human ingenuity. Perhaps we will never know exactly what drove the ancient people of the Diquis to carve hundreds of solid stone spheres and scatter them across their territory. But what is certain is that they left behind a lasting mark, a message round and quiet, reminding us that not all mysteries are spoken. Some are simply shaped. The 7 pagodas of Mahabalipuram, India's sunken temples. Along the southeastern coast of India, in the state of Tamil Nadu, lies the small coastal town of Mahabalipuram, also known as Mahabalipuram. At first glance, the town is a popular tourist destination filled with intricately carved stone monuments, rock-cut temples, and monumental reliefs dating back over 1,000 years. But Mahabalipuram is more than just an open-air archaeological site. Beneath its foundations and just off its shores, according to ancient legend, lies a lost city, a submerged sanctuary known as the 7 Pagodas. The expression 7 Pagodas does not originate from modern Western imagination, but from ancestral tales passed down for centuries among the local people. The legend tells that, in ancient times, 7 temples stood along the coast, built with such magnificence that the gods themselves became jealous. To punish human arrogance, a mighty storm sent by divine forces submerged 6 of the temples beneath the waters of the Indian Ocean, leaving only one still visible, the Shore Temple. That temple still stands today, majestic on the rocks facing the sea. Built of granite in the 7th century during the reign of the Pallava dynasty, it is a jewel of Dravidian architecture. Despite centuries of erosion from wind, saltwater, and monsoons, it retains its original structure, 2 main sanctuaries dedicated to Shiva and Vishnu. But what makes this temple even more fascinating is the possibility that it is merely the visible tip of a much larger complex buried beneath the waves. For centuries, the story of the sunken temples was considered a legend without archaeological basis. Arab chroniclers, European explorers, and local poets spoke of the 7 pagodas, but without physical evidence, the tale remained folklore. That changed in the year 2004. That year, a massive earthquake in the Indian Ocean triggered a devastating tsunami that struck the coasts of several South Asian countries, including India. In Mahabalipuram, the sea receded dramatically before the giant waves arrived. During those brief minutes of exposed seabed, local witnesses claimed to see stone structures emerging from the ocean floor. Columns, walls, statues. Regular shapes that clearly did not belong to the natural environment. Just days later, archaeologists from India's National Institute of Oceanography, working with Navy divers, launched underwater investigations. What they found partially confirmed what legend had long claimed. Submerged ruins just off the coast, including carved stone blocks, sculptures, platforms, and what appeared to be staircases, possibly remnants of ceremonial structures. Research continued in the following years using sonar, specialized divers, and underwater mapping. The results were intriguing. At least 6 stone formations were identified beneath the sea, which, based on estimates, may be the remains of temples or other ancient structures. Though not all of the complex has been excavated, due to technical challenges, as well as legal and environmental restrictions, the evidence strongly supports that the legend of the 7 pagodas was not just fantasy. But who built these temples and why? And what exactly caused their disappearance? Historically, the region of Mahabalipuram was a major port and spiritual center during the rule of the Pallava dynasty, which flourished from the 6th to the 9th centuries of our era. These kings were great patrons of the arts and commissioned temples carved directly into rock, along with monumental buildings that intertwined spirituality, astronomy, and Hindu cosmology. Temples were not just places of worship, they were physical representations of the universe, esoteric maps of the world and the soul. However, the theory that several temples were destroyed by a natural catastrophe gains strength when the tectonic activity of the region is considered. Some geologists believe that a series of earthquakes and tsunamis over 1,000 years ago could have caused the collapse of these coastal structures, dragging them into the sea and burying them beneath marine sediment. It is also possible that rising sea levels over centuries gradually submerged what was once solid ground. Other researchers have proposed that the temples were deliberately abandoned or hidden after the fall of Pallava rule, when new dynasties took over the region. In this context, the submerged temples may represent not just a natural disaster, but the systematic forgetting of an entire era. What remains certain is that, to this day, the full story of the 7 pagodas is incomplete. Not all of what lies beneath the sea has been excavated. The functions or dedications of the submerged temples have not been definitively identified. We do not know whether there were truly 7 temples, or whether the number is symbolic, as so many numbers are in Indian cosmology. But what cannot be denied is the existence of a legacy submerged just off the shores of Mahabalipuram. A past that has withstood the fury of the sea, the battering of the wind, and the passing of centuries. A ceremonial complex carved in stone, conceived, perhaps, to last for eternity, and still today sending signals from the depths of the ocean. Local fishermen still tell stories. They say that on certain moonless nights, when the sea is calm and the sky is clear, dark shapes can be seen beneath the water, aligned like a corridor toward the stars. Some even claim to hear bells or chants rising from the depths. These are myths, yes, but in Mahabalipuram, myths have already proven to contain forgotten truths. The 7 pagodas, real or symbolic, visible or submerged, represent a link between time and faith, between solid ground and the unpredictable sea. They are a reminder that even the grandest works may disappear without a trace, unless someone remembers they were ever there. The lost civilization of Doggerland, the European Atlantis. Long before the North Sea became the gray expanse of waves and oil platforms we know today, there was once a vast stretch of fertile land beneath its waters. It was inhabited by human communities, crossed by rivers, covered in forests, and teeming with wildlife. A world entirely forgotten by history. That land, now submerged, is known as Doggerland, and for many researchers, it represents the Atlantis of Europe. A lost civilization buried under the sea, not by mythology, but by science. Doggerland was an enormous territory that once connected the British Isles to what is now Denmark, the Netherlands, and northern Germany. Between 8,000 and 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, sea levels were significantly lower. What is now the seabed of the North Sea was then a green plain, dotted with lakes, hills, marshes, and inland coastlines. In every way, it was a habitable and fertile region, considered by archaeologists to be one of the richest territories of Mesolithic Europe. The name Doggerland became popular in the 20th century, following accidental discoveries made by fishing vessels in the North Sea. For decades, trawlers dragging nets across the seabed began pulling up unexpected objects. Carved stone tools, bones from extinct mammals, human teeth, and fragments of worked wood. These items were not from sunken ships or modern waste. They were the remains of a land that no longer exists, of a world that disappeared beneath the waves. The name comes from Dogger Bank, a submerged sandbank that marks the heart of this ancient landmass. In Mesolithic times, this region was not only dry land but likely one of the most densely populated areas in northern Europe. Geological studies and modern seafloor mapping have revealed that Doggerland once covered an area larger than present-day Great Britain, a true sunken nation, if the term can be used. The people of Doggerland were hunters, gatherers, and fishers. They lived in small groups, followed the rhythm of the seasons, and adapted to the diverse landscapes for survival. The land offered plenty: deer, wild boar, bison, freshwater fish, shellfish, wild fruits, and migratory birds. Archaeologists believe Doggerland served as a natural corridor for human migration, a vital artery connecting northern Europe to the British Isles and enabling the exchange of tools, customs, and perhaps even languages. But around the year 6100 before Christ, everything began to change. The end of the Ice Age triggered a gradual but unstoppable rise in sea levels. The melting of polar ice caps and continental glaciers caused the oceans to slowly reclaim the land. Doggerland shrank year after year, century after century. Its rivers became estuaries, its forests turned into wetlands, and its hills became islands. Eventually, the entire region was submerged. The final and most catastrophic event is believed to have occurred around 6100 before Christ, when a massive underwater landslide, known as the Storegga Slide, off the coast of Norway, generated a giant tsunami that violently struck the North Sea coast. This wave may have wiped out the last coastal communities of Doggerland, destroying settlements and marking the definitive end of the region. Unlike other sunken lands born from myth, Doggerland truly existed. Its disappearance is not a legend, but a geological and historical reality. Its study has transformed how archaeologists understand the human occupation of Europe and has opened new paths for the exploration of submerged lands around the world. Thanks to modern technology, including high-resolution sonar, bathymetric scanning, and sediment analysis, scientists have begun to partially reconstruct Doggerland's ancient landscape. Researchers have identified former river channels, coastal lagoons, inland lakes, possible campsites, and even hints of primitive structures. But excavating beneath the sea remains difficult, slow, and expensive. So far, no monumental structures, temples, or cities in the traditional sense have been found. But this does not diminish Doggerland's importance. On the contrary, it places it as one of the great forgotten chapters of human history, a piece of our past literally erased by the ocean. It also raises deeper questions. How many other lands, cultures, and civilizations have been swallowed by the sea? How much knowledge has been lost beneath the waves? And how fragile are the boundaries between land and water? Doggerland is a mirror of what Atlantis might have been. A real place, inhabited and thriving, destroyed by natural forces and relegated to oblivion. The difference is that Doggerland has left behind physical traces, measurable data, archaeological remains, and a solid scientific foundation. It is no longer a myth, but a real story buried beneath the sea. As scientific teams continue to recover fragments of bone, wood, flint, and charcoal from the seabed, the image of Doggerland is slowly being rebuilt. A land once full of life, forgotten for thousands of years, and now rising again from the silence of the ocean floor. The mystery of Doggerland is not only a journey into the past, it is also a warning for the future. Because if an entire civilization can vanish beneath the sea without leaving much of a trace, then nothing we know today is ever truly guaranteed. The Maine Penny, the Viking artifact that should not exist. In the world of archaeology, there are objects that defy the official timeline, items found in places where, according to everything we know, they should never have been. These are known as out-of-place artifacts. Among them, few are as intriguing and controversial as the so-called Maine Penny, a small medieval coin that has sparked intense debate about Viking presence in North America centuries before Christopher Columbus. It all began in the year 1957, when a team of archaeologists from the Maine State Museum conducted an excavation at an ancient indigenous site in the town of Brooklyn, on the Blue Hill Peninsula in northern Maine. The site, known as the Goddard Site, had been occupied for centuries by Algonquian peoples. The archaeologists expected to find pottery, bone tools, and everyday items. What they did not expect was to uncover, among the remains of a camp over 1,000 years old, a Viking silver coin. The coin was found several centimeters below the surface, mixed with charcoal, shells, pottery fragments, and other clearly indigenous objects. It was about 2 centimeters in diameter, slightly corroded, but still showed clear markings. It was a Norwegian penny, minted during the reign of King Olaf Kyrre, between the years 1067 and 1093. In other words, it belonged to the 11th century after Christ. The discovery caused a stir. If the coin was authentic, and all studies confirmed that it was, its presence in a North American indigenous excavation meant that the Vikings had not only reached the continent, but had left tangible evidence much farther south than previously believed. Until then, the only Viking settlement accepted by the archaeological community was L'Anse aux Meadows, at the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada. There, in 1960, the remains of a Scandinavian village dating to the 11th century were discovered. It was solid proof that Norse explorers, likely led by Leif Erikson, had reached America centuries before Columbus. But that site is far to the north, in a region with a climate similar to their native lands. The Maine Penny, by contrast, was found more than 1,000 kilometers to the south, in a region inhabited by indigenous peoples with no documented connection to the Scandinavians. How did that coin end up there? One possibility is that the Vikings themselves explored the Atlantic coast beyond Newfoundland, traveling in their famous open-hull ships, which were suited for both the sea and shallow rivers. It's feasible that they may have interacted, traded, or exchanged goods with indigenous peoples along their journey. Another possibility is that the coin changed hands over time, slowly making its way south through a vast indigenous trade network from a more northern settlement. But there are problems with both theories. First, the coin was found in a consistent archaeological context. It was not on the surface or separated from the cultural layer. It was buried within well-defined layers, alongside objects dated to the 11th and 12th centuries. This suggests it was not planted nor introduced in modern times. Second, the tribes occupying the region at the time did not work with silver, nor did they have knowledge of minting, so they could not have manufactured or reproduced the coin. Despite the authenticity of the find, many skeptics tried to discredit it. Some claimed it may have been accidentally dropped by the excavators themselves. Others argued that the coin had been brought by collectors or European traders centuries later and somehow ended up mixed with indigenous remains. But none of these theories could account for the consistency of the archaeological layer. The most widely accepted explanation, although still considered speculative, is that the coin was acquired through indigenous trade, possibly from groups that had contact with Norse explorers. If true, the discovery not only confirms the existence of complex trade routes among pre-Columbian peoples, but also greatly expands the geographic reach of Viking voyages in America. It also opens new questions. How far south did the Norse explorers travel? Did they establish other camps that remain undiscovered? What impact did they have on the indigenous cultures they encountered? And perhaps most unsettling, how many other pieces of evidence have gone unnoticed, discarded because they do not fit the accepted narrative? The Maine Penny is, in essence, an anomaly, a small, modest, unadorned object that may change everything we know about the early history of North America. It is a reminder that history is not a closed story, but an incomplete puzzle, full of pieces that sometimes appear in the most unexpected places. Today, the coin is preserved in the Maine State Museum, where it remains a subject of study, controversy, and fascination. It represents the unlikely meeting of two worlds, separated by oceans, centuries, and cultures. And perhaps it is only the first trace of a larger, more complex story, still waiting to be uncovered. The unfinished obelisk of Aswan, the abandoned monument. On the banks of the Nile in southern Egypt, in the city of Aswan, lies one of the greatest enigmas of the ancient world. It is not a pyramid, nor a temple, not even a tomb. In fact, it was never completed. Yet even in its unfinished state, it has become one of the most fascinating examples of Egyptian engineering. This is the unfinished obelisk of Aswan, a colossal piece of granite that was never detached from the bedrock, and one that raises more questions than answers. The site is located in an ancient quarry known as the Northern Quarries, where the Egyptians extracted the famous pink granite of Aswan. This material was used for the most durable and symbolic elements of their architecture: columns, statues, sarcophagi, and of course, obelisks. Aswan granite was highly prized for its hardness, beauty, and resistance to weathering, but it also presented enormous technical challenges. Carving and transporting it without breaking required a combination of knowledge, experience, and extraordinary precision. It was in this quarry around the 15th century before Christ, during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut or possibly Pharaoh Thutmose III, that royal stonemasons began sculpting what would have been the largest obelisk in all of Egyptian history. Its dimensions are astonishing. More than 42 meters long, nearly 5 meters wide at the base, and estimated to weigh about 1,200 tons if completed. To put that into perspective, that weight is equivalent to roughly 200 adult African elephants. And all of it was being carved by hand, directly from the rock, using tools made of softer stone and copper. But something went wrong. During the excavation process, cracks appeared in the granite, not on the surface but deep within the core of the monolith. These structural fractures made it impossible to continue the work, because the risk of the obelisk breaking while being lifted was too great. So the stonemasons abandoned the project. They did not dismantle it, repurpose it, or try to repair it. They simply left it there, half-carved, still attached to the rock, as if time had frozen. And there it has remained for more than 3,000 years. What makes the unfinished obelisk so remarkable is not only its colossal size, but the fact that it reveals the process of construction, something extremely rare in Egyptian archaeology. Most of the obelisks that have survived to this day were already completed or have been relocated from their original sites. But this one, being unfinished and still in its original context, allows archaeologists to study firsthand how ancient stonemasons worked. At the site, you can see tool marks, holes where wedges were inserted, and precise cuts along the edges. Evidence shows that harder stones like dolerite were used to pound and wear down the granite. This method, primitive at first glance, required astonishing technical control. The level surface of the obelisk, the symmetry of its sides, and the uniformity of its faces all point to a sophisticated knowledge of stoneworking. But the mystery does not end there. How did they plan to move it? There is no definitive theory on how the Egyptians transported obelisks of such size. Some of the ones now found in Rome, Paris, Istanbul, and London were originally brought from Egypt in ancient times. But none of them comes close to the size of the unfinished obelisk. The Lateran obelisk in Rome, for example, is about 32 meters tall and weighs 300 tons. Even so, moving and erecting it required a massive effort, even with Roman technology. The Aswan obelisk would have weighed nearly 4 times as much. The Egyptians did not have wheels in the modern sense, nor metal pulleys. The most accepted theories suggest they used wooden sledges lubricated with water or mud to drag blocks across the sand. It has also been proposed that they built ramps of mud brick, wood, and stone to lift the monoliths. But with a block weighing over 1,000 tons, none of these theories is fully convincing. Transporting it, loading it onto a barge, and sailing it hundreds of kilometers down the Nile to its final destination, likely Karnak or Luxor, would be a challenge even for modern engineering. The unfinished obelisk raises yet another, deeper question. Why attempt it at all? Why invest years of labor, dozens of artisans, tools, time, and resources into a block so massive it pushed the boundaries of human capability? Was it a display of power? A symbol of divine devotion? a monumental act of ambition meant to elevate the status of its patron? Some researchers suggest it may have been a propaganda project, commissioned by a pharaoh eager to surpass the achievements of his predecessors. Others believe that the very act of attempting the impossible was part of the ritual itself, a gesture of spiritual transcendence through sheer monumentality. What is certain is that the unfinished obelisk still lies there, silent, never transported, never inscribed with hieroglyphs, never erected before a temple. It never fulfilled its symbolic purpose. And yet today, it is more famous than many completed obelisks because it contains something deeper than a carved message. It holds the visible trace of human failure in the face of overwhelming ambition. In modern times, the site has become an important archaeological landmark. It has been preserved, walkways have been installed for visitors, and studies continue, not just of the obelisk itself, but of the entire quarry, which appears to have been a major center of monumental stonework. To see it in person, lying across the rock, gigantic, abandoned, and still defiant, is a nearly mystical experience. It is the vision of an intention frozen in time, a work that never was but still speaks, because in its unfinished state, the obelisk of Aswan stands as a testament to the limits of human ingenuity, to what was attempted and never achieved, to what could have been and was not. The copper scroll, the treasure map no one has solved. In the arid Judean desert, where the sun scorches the rocks and the wind carries centuries of forgotten stories, some of the most important documents of the ancient world have been unearthed. These are the famed Dead Sea Scrolls, a collection of Hebrew texts discovered in caves and cliffs near Qumran, along the shores of the saltiest sea on earth. Most of these scrolls were written on parchment or papyrus by the Essenes, a Jewish sect that lived in the region more than 2,000 years ago. But among the religious, prophetic, and legal writings, there was one that stood out completely. A text that spoke not of law or God, but of something entirely different: hidden treasure. That document is known as the Copper Scroll. It was discovered in the year 1952, in Cave 3 of Qumran. But unlike the other scrolls, this one was not made of leather or plant fibers. It was made of metal, specifically a copper alloy with a small amount of tin. That fact alone makes it unique, completely without precedent among the other ancient texts from the region. And its condition was so deteriorated that it could not be unrolled without shattering. For years, it remained sealed, while archaeologists wondered what could possibly have been so important as to be inscribed on metal. Finally, in the year 1956, the decision was made to cut it carefully into strips so that it could be read. What was revealed stunned everyone. It was not a religious text or a theological commentary. It was a list, a precise, technical, practical list. It detailed 64 locations where, supposedly, vast amounts of gold, silver, sacred objects, and other treasures had been hidden. Some lines were as direct as, "In the third cave of the valley of the hill of Kolit, under the slabs, 40 talents of silver," or, "In the courtyard of the temple, beneath the stone of the northwest corner, are pure gold vessels." The tone of the scroll is dry, objective, and unembellished. There is no context, no narrative, no explanation of who hid the treasures or why. Just locations, quantities, and brief descriptions. It reads like a secret military inventory, written by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and who wanted someone else to find it. But to this day, none of those treasures have ever been found. That is what makes the Copper Scroll one of the greatest archaeological mysteries of all time. Are we looking at humanity's first treasure map? Or is it a symbolic document, a coded fable, a creation with a spiritual purpose rather than a material one? Interpretations vary. Some scholars believe the scroll describes treasures hidden by the Essenes, possibly to protect them from the impending Roman invasion during the First Jewish-Roman War, which ended with the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the year 70 after Christ. In that context, the hidden objects would be sacred items from the temple, ritual gold, tithes, cups, menorahs, objects of incalculable value. Other researchers suggest that the scroll may have been written by Jewish priests connected directly to the temple, not just by the Essenes. According to this theory, It was hidden in Qumran as part of a desperate attempt to preserve both the spiritual and material wealth of Israel before total collapse. If true, the Copper Scroll could contain the final location of the treasures of Solomon's Temple, a theory that has fueled books, documentaries, and esoteric speculation for decades. But there is a fundamental challenge: the ambiguity of the places mentioned. Although the text is extremely specific in terms of amounts, it uses names of hills, caves, and paths that no longer exist, or that have changed drastically over time. Most of the listed locations cannot be reliably identified. Many references seem to depend on a geographical knowledge that only someone from that era would have had. Another layer of mystery lies in the language. The Hebrew used in the Copper Scroll differs from the other Dead Sea Scrolls. It is more technical, more formal, almost administrative in tone. This has led some experts to believe it was written by a different hand, possibly in a different context, perhaps even decades later than the other scrolls. Some believe it may even be a copy of an older text. And then comes the skeptical view. Some claim the Copper Scroll does not describe a real treasure at all. Perhaps it is allegorical, some kind of spiritual exercise, where the treasures are virtues or teachings, and the caves represent stages of the soul. This interpretation, though symbolically plausible, does not convince those who focus on the material content of the text, because the specificity of the amounts, the measurements in talents and minas, and the detailed lists of materials all point toward a literal intention. Over the years, several searches have been carried out. Excavations in nearby caves, ground surveys with radar, cross-referencing of historical sources. Even unofficial expeditions funded by private groups and mystery enthusiasts have tried to locate at least one of the places mentioned. But so far, all efforts have failed. Not a single piece of gold. Not one sacred cup. Nothing. Still, the mystery persists. The Copper Scroll remains a real, tangible document. Preserved today in the Jordan Archaeological Museum in Amman. Can be seen, read, studied, but not solved. It is a map that leads nowhere, or perhaps to many places, all of them lost to time. Perhaps the treasure was already found in ancient times, and all that remains is the echo of a long-completed rescue. Perhaps it never existed, or perhaps, somewhere in the desert, a hoard of unimaginable wealth still lies buried, protected by a metal message meant for someone who would come much later. And while that day has yet to come, if it ever does, the Copper Scroll remains like a sealed capsule from the past, a reminder that even in the darkest times, someone believed that it was worth hiding something for the future. The collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization, a vanished ancient world. When we speak of the great civilizations of antiquity, we usually think of Egypt, Mesopotamia, or China. Yet during the same period, and in some cases even earlier, a highly advanced, urban, and sophisticated culture flourished in a region of South Asia that today includes parts of Pakistan and northwestern India. This was the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization, named after one of its principal cities. At its height, it rivaled the complexity of any other ancient culture of its time, and yet it vanished suddenly and mysteriously. Its origins trace back to around the year 3300 before Christ, although some earlier settlements may date as far back as 1,000 years before that. What is most surprising is the modernity of its urban planning. Major cities like Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Lothal, and Dhalavira were built on a grid layout, with straight streets intersecting at right angles, underground drainage systems, water reservoirs, public baths, and houses equipped with private sewage systems. In other words, their infrastructure was so advanced that many modern cities took millennia to reach a comparable level. Buildings were constructed using uniformly sized fired bricks, suggesting centralized control over material production and meticulous planning. Markets were clearly defined, residential areas were separated from public spaces, and there were structures that may have functioned as warehouses, administrative centers, or temples. But perhaps the most intriguing feature of this civilization is what it lacked. There is no evidence of palaces, no commemorative monuments, no royal tombs. No statues of kings have been found, nor inscriptions glorifying rulers. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, which built their identity around pharaohs and divine kingship, the people of the Indus seem to have lived in a surprisingly egalitarian society, or at least one far less hierarchical than was common in the ancient world. Another great mystery is their writing system. The people of the Indus developed a script found on tablets, seals, and ceramic objects. Though thousands of examples have been uncovered, the Indus script remains undeciphered. There are no long texts, no bilingual inscriptions to guide interpretation. What we have are sequences of symbols that might represent syllables, words, or abstract ideas, but their meaning remains an enigma. This leaves archaeologists in the dark regarding the civilization's mythology, political organization, laws, or internal history. We do know, however, that they were skilled traders. Their goods, especially pottery, beads, bronze tools, and seals, have been found as far away as Mesopotamia, indicating active international trade networks more than 4,000 years ago. These exchanges were not only material but likely cultural, though without readable texts, the flow of ideas is difficult to trace. And then, quite suddenly, everything ended. By around the year 1900 before Christ, the great Indus cities began to decline. Construction quality deteriorated. Houses shrank in size. Drainage systems were no longer maintained. Some settlements were abandoned entirely. Within a few centuries, the Indus Valley civilization disappeared, leaving behind no political legacy, no clear military conflict, no evidence of widespread destruction or visible invaders. Why did it collapse? Many theories exist, but none have been confirmed with certainty. One proposes severe climate change, a shift in the monsoon pattern that reduced seasonal rainfall, causing prolonged droughts, failed harvests, and the eventual abandonment of urban centers. Recent geological studies support this, showing that rivers crucial to the region, such as the fabled Sarasvati, changed course or dried up completely during that time. A slow-moving but relentless catastrophe. Another theory suggests natural disasters, such as massive earthquakes, capable of altering river paths and disrupting the ecosystems that sustain the cities. Some archaeologists argue the collapse may have been gradual, the result of a complex mix of environmental, economic, and social factors that steadily weakened societal structures. A more controversial hypothesis involves the arrival of Indo-European peoples, the so-called Aryans, from Central Asia. According to later Vedic texts, these tribes may have displaced the original population, introducing new beliefs, languages, and customs. However, this theory has been widely debated, and many scholars now argue that it was not a violent invasion, but rather a slow, complex migration and cultural integration. What is most unsettling is the lack of resistance. There are no records of war, no mass graves, no besieged fortresses. The disappearance feels more like an evaporation than a collapse, as if an entire civilization slowly shut down its social mechanisms and quietly faded away, fragmented into rural communities, absorbed by other cultures, or simply lost to time. For centuries, the Indus civilization was forgotten. Its cities were buried under dust and sand. Its rivers changed course, and its memory faded. It was not until the 20th century that its ruins were rediscovered and acknowledged as one of the great pillars of ancient history. Today, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are World Heritage Sites. But the mysteries only deepen. Who were these people, really? What stories did they tell? How did they manage to live in relative peace for centuries, without armies, without enslaving neighbors, without glorifying warlords? And above all, why did they leave? What remains are silent ruins, seals with unreadable symbols, empty streets, and crumbling walls. A mute testament to a civilization that flourished without violence, built with intelligence, and that, perhaps for that very reason, defies the frameworks we use to understand the past. The Indus Valley civilization remains a mirror, reflecting what we might become, what we could lose, and what we have already forgotten. The Antikythera Mechanism, the 2,000-year-old computer. In the year 1901, off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera, a group of sponge divers made a discovery that would forever change our understanding of ancient technology. At a depth of around 40 meters, among the rusted remains of a Roman shipwreck that had lain on the seabed for more than 2,000 years, they recovered bronze statues, broken amphorae, and a strange, unrecognizable object. A corroded mass of metal, with fragments of gears, numbers, and overlapping discs. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a lump of metal, deformed by salt water and time. But what the researchers held in their hands was something extraordinary. The Antikythera Mechanism, a device that many today consider to be the world's first analog computer. Radiocarbon dating and analysis of the surrounding artifacts placed the shipwreck between the years 80 and 100 before the birth of Christ. The ship likely carried cultural treasures from Asia Minor to Rome, possibly as war spoils or offerings. Among those objects, nestled among sculptures and manuscripts, was this machine. Compact, intricate, and completely unlike anything else known from the ancient world. For decades, the mechanism remained undeciphered. It was little more than an oxidized block, split into fragments, too damaged to identify. It was not until the 1950s that British physicist Derek J. de Soliprice studied it in depth, using X-rays to peer inside the metal layers and reveal its internal structure. What he discovered seemed impossible. A system of at least 30 bronze gears, interlocked with extraordinary precision, capable of producing complex, coordinated movements with astonishing mechanical logic. As scanning technology advanced through computed tomography and 3D modeling, researchers gradually unraveled how the mechanism worked. Today we know that it functioned as a mechanical astronomical calculator, designed to predict the positions of the sun, the moon, the visible planets, solar and lunar eclipses, and even the dates of major sporting events like the Olympic Games. Users would turn a small handle, which set into motion a cascade of interlocked gears. These, in turn, moved various dials displaying solar calendars, lunar phases, planetary cycles, and more. One of the gears modeled the Saros cycle, an 18-year and 11-day period used to predict eclipses. Another gear, even more complex, accounted for the irregular motion of the moon, a concept that required advanced knowledge not only of astronomy but also of mechanical engineering. The level of mathematical and technical understanding needed to construct such a machine surpasses by centuries what was previously believed possible in the ancient world. The precision of the gears, their alignment, and the elegance of their function suggest an engineering tradition that has left no other trace. Who built it? For what purpose? And why is it the only one of its kind? The names most often mentioned are Hipparchus of Nicaea and Posidonius, astronomers from the Hellenistic period who lived on the island of Rhodes, a center of scientific learning at the time. Some researchers speculate that the device may have even originated from the legendary library of Alexandria, before its knowledge was destroyed or scattered. Regardless of its origin, what is most confounding is that the Antikythera Mechanism is unique. No other artifact like it exists in the entire archaeological record. The technology it represents was not replicated or surpassed until at least the 14th century, when astronomical clocks began appearing in medieval Europe. That means this device existed 1,000 years ahead of its time, and then vanished, leaving no legacy. Some scholars believe that the knowledge required to build the mechanism was lost during the turmoil of the ancient world, through wars, invasions, and the collapse of scientific institutions. Others suggest that it was known only to a small circle of specialists, and that their deaths meant the end of a secret, sophisticated tradition. Even today, in the 21st century, researchers still do not fully understand the mechanism. Each new scan reveals previously unseen details, microscopic inscriptions, hidden scales, or unknown gear functions. Some components may have been made from materials like wood or softer metals that did not survive. What has been reconstructed is extraordinary but still incomplete. The Antikythera Mechanism raises a disturbing question. If such a machine existed more than 2,000 years ago, what other knowledge was lost with the fall of ancient civilizations? How much more did the classical world know than we are prepared to admit? Today, the mechanism is housed in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, preserved as a singular treasure. Though fragmented and corroded, it remains capable of inspiring awe. Functional replicas have been built by modern engineers, and each attempt to replicate its complexity only reaffirms the brilliance of the original design. In an age where we believe knowledge moves only forward, the Antikythera Mechanism forces us to look back and recognize that there was once a time when humanity looked to the heavens and built machines to understand them, with a precision that still leaves us breathless. The lost city of Aztlán, the forgotten homeland of the Aztecs. At the heart of Mexica mythology, the people later called Aztecs by the Europeans, there is a sacred place, a legendary origin wrapped in mystery, symbols, and memory, Aztlán. It is said that from this distant homeland, the ancestors of the Mexica people began a long and painful migration southward, a journey that would eventually lead them to the founding of the great city of Tenochtitlan, birthplace of the mighty Aztec Empire. But what makes Aztlán so intriguing is that it is not only a symbol, it may also be a real place that no one has yet been able to find. According to stories preserved in ancient codices, colonial chronicles, and oral traditions, Aztlán was a fertile, beautiful land, inhabited by 7 Nawa tribes who lived in peace, until, under divine command, they were forced to leave and seek a new destiny. The word Aztlán is often translated as Place of the Herons or White Place, a symbolic name that has led to many interpretations. In pictographic depictions, Aztlán appears as an island surrounded by water, featuring temples, caves, and an architecture that hints at spiritual and social order. This mythical land is mentioned in several pre-Hispanic and colonial codices, including the Codex Boccherini and the Codex Auburn. In them, the migration of the 7 tribes, among them the Mexica, is described in detail, guided by a god, most likely Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war deity. The journey is said to have lasted over a century, filled with spiritual trials, battles with other peoples, temporary settlements, and major social transformations. Eventually, the Mexica arrived at Lake Texcoco, where they founded Tenochtitlan in the year 1325, fulfilling the vision promised to them. But where was Aztlán? That question has puzzled historians, archaeologists, and explorers for centuries. Some interpret Aztlán as a metaphor for a lost paradise, a foundational myth reflecting a real migration that was later mythologized. Others, however, firmly believe that Aztlán was a physical place, a lost city that may still be buried somewhere in the landscapes of northern Mexico, or even in the southwestern United States. Some theories place Aztlán in regions such as Nayarit, Durango, or the Lerma River valleys. Others go farther north to the Sonoran Desert or as far as Utah or Arizona. The latter is supported by linguistic evidence. Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica, belongs to the Uto-Aztecan family, which includes languages still spoken across the southwestern United States. This points to a deep cultural and migratory connection that may trace back to lands much farther north than the Valley of Mexico. Another possibility is that Aztlán was not a single city, but a confederation of settlements, a network of culturally linked communities that, over time, were idealized and remembered as one sacred island at the center of a lost homeland. In the 19th century, explorers like Alfredo Chavero and Francisco del Paso y Troncoso launched expeditions to locate Aztlán. Throughout the 20th century, both Mexican and American scholars continued the search. Even today, respected archaeologists like Eduardo Matos Moctezuma acknowledge that Aztlán may indeed be real, perhaps buried in an unexcavated site, still waiting to be rediscovered. In modern times, particularly since the 1960s, the name Aztlán has been embraced by Chicano cultural and political movements in the United States. For many, Aztlán is not only the Mexica point of origin, it is also a symbol of ancestral territory lost to history and a shared heritage for millions of Mexican descendants living in what was once northern Mexico. In that context, Aztlán has become both a myth and a banner, a symbol of identity and resistance. But if Aztlán was indeed a real city, why did it vanish without a trace? Some suggest that it may have been destroyed by natural disasters, earthquakes, prolonged droughts, or invasions. Others believe it was gradually abandoned as the tribes migrated south, its structures lost to time, reused by other cultures, or buried under layers of soil and vegetation. Still others argue that Aztlán was never truly lost. It simply transformed, changed names, or was absorbed into another cultural identity. The mystery of Aztlán matters. To uncover it would not only clarify the origins of the Mexica people, but also help reconstruct one of the most important migratory movements in pre-Columbian America. According to indigenous chronicles, that journey was not random. It was guided by divine vision and sacred prophecy. Beyond geography, Aztlán is a powerful idea. It represents the beginning, the spiritual homeland, the source of unity, ancestral wisdom, and sacred connection. That is how the Mexica understood it, and that is how they passed it down through codices, temples, stories, and songs. To this day, Aztlán has not been found. No confirmed ruins have been excavated. No inscription has ever identified it with certainty. And yet, its voice still echoes across the centuries. Perhaps its precise location is not the most important part. Perhaps Aztlán is a cultural compass, a collective memory pointing toward the roots of a people who, after centuries of struggle, built an empire with the unwavering belief that they would someday return to the place where everything began. Kailasa Temple, the megastructure carved from a mountain. In the state of Maharashtra in western India, nestled among ancient basalt hills and rocky landscapes, stands a structure so monumental and baffling that it challenges everything we think we know about ancient construction. It is not a temple built with stacked stones or assembled from separate parts. Instead, the Kailasa Temple, part of the Ellora Caves complex, was carved downward from a single mountain, and most astonishing of all, no one truly knows how it was done. The temple is one of 34 rock-cut structures at Ellora, a sacred site that includes Buddhist, Jain, and Hindu monuments, all hewn directly into the living rock. But Kailasa stands out above them all, not just for its scale, but for its architectural brilliance. Dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva, the temple takes its name from Mount Kailash, the legendary abode of Shiva in the Himalayas. What makes Kailasa truly unique is that it wasn't built in the traditional sense. No materials were added, no stones were stacked, no scaffolding or support structures were used. Instead, artisans began at the top of the mountain and meticulously carved their way downward, removing over 200,000 tons of solid rock with simple tools: chisels, hammers, and picks. Every detail, columns, statues, staircases, ceilings, inner chambers, outer courtyards, was sculpted from a single massive stone. There was no margin for error. Even today, with modern machinery, such a feat would be staggering. Yet the temple was completed sometime in the 8th or 9th century, under the rule of the Rashtrakuta dynasty, according to inscriptions found nearby. The structure itself is enormous, about 30 meters high, 45 meters wide, and 85 meters deep. At its heart stands a towering shrine housing a lingam, the symbolic representation of Shiva, surrounded by columns, divine figures, mythical creatures, and reliefs depicting scenes from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the great Hindu epics. Two monumental gateway pillars stand on either side of the temple's entrance, echoing the grandeur of southern Indian temple design. The precision of the stonework is nothing short of extraordinary. Interior spaces show perfect symmetry, balanced proportions, and ornamental detail that borders on the impossible, especially when considering the primitive tools available at the time. Hidden passageways, raised platforms, and chambers with unclear functions still puzzle archaeologists and historians alike. But the most incredible aspect may be the timeline. Some historians believe the temple was completed in under 20 years. If that's accurate, and multiple studies suggest it could be, the scale and speed of the project would require a workforce of extraordinary size, coordination, and skill. The builders would have had to work in unison, guided by a flawless design and three-dimensional vision. Carving downward, there was no room for mistakes. One miscalculation could have ruined the entire structure. And yet, we know almost nothing about how it was planned or executed. There are no surviving blueprints, no detailed records, no ancient manuals. How did they measure and align such complex geometry without paper, without digital instruments, without any of the tools modern architects rely on? Who conceived the design? How were workers organized? And perhaps most perplexing of all, why devote so much effort to a single temple? For many scholars, Kailasa is the ultimate expression of spiritual devotion rendered in stone. It was not just a temple, but an offering, a monumental act of worship. By carving the structure out of the mountain, without separating the temple from the earth, the builders were essentially creating a physical replica of Mount Kailash, the divine mountain home of Shiva. In that sense, it was both an act of reverence and an architectural embodiment of the sacred. As with many inexplicable feats of ancient engineering, the Kailasa Temple has inspired theories beyond mainstream archaeology. Some suggest the involvement of lost knowledge or advanced ancient technology. Others speculate about influences from civilizations that predate the known historical record. While these ideas lack concrete evidence, their popularity reflects how astonishing this structure truly is. Today, the Kailasa Temple still stands, not as a ruin, but as a living monument, visited by pilgrims, travelers, and scholars alike. Its towering walls, carved staircases, and intricately chiseled halls remain a silent challenge to modern understanding. Each surface whispers of a time when faith, art, and engineering merged in ways we still struggle to comprehend. Standing before it, one cannot help but feel small, because this is not just a temple. It is a declaration, a statement carved in stone that human vision, when fused with divine inspiration, can literally reshape a mountain. The lost Library of Alexandria, the greatest intellectual tragedy in history. On the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, where North Africa meets the deep blue of the sea, there once stood a city that, for centuries, was synonymous with wisdom, science, and culture. That city was Alexandria, and at its heart stood a legendary institution, a beacon of human knowledge whose disappearance remains the greatest intellectual loss in history, the Library of Alexandria. Founded in the 3rd century before the beginning of the Common Era, during the reign of Ptolemy I Soter, one of the generals of Alexander the Great, the library was not just a building filled with scrolls. It was an ambitious attempt to gather all the knowledge of the known world in one place. Its goal was to collect every written text ever produced by humanity, in every language and from every region. A dream that anticipated the idea of a global encyclopedia long before the invention of the printing press. The library was part of a larger complex known as the Museion, a temple dedicated to the Muses, the goddesses of inspiration, which functioned as a kind of ancient university, observatory, translation center, and research institution. It brought together scholars from Egypt, Greece, Persia, India, Mesopotamia, and beyond. It was a true crossroads of civilizations and ideas. How many texts did it contain? Estimates vary, but some ancient sources claim the library once held between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls. These were not books in the modern sense, but hand-copied scrolls that preserved everything from medical texts and astronomy to law, religion, poetry, maps, philosophy, and agricultural techniques, the written memory of the ancient world. Its acquisition policy was aggressive and relentless. Every ship that arrived at the port of Alexandria was searched by authorities. If books or scrolls were found, they were confiscated, copied, and returned, though often the copy, not the original. It was a state-backed obsession with knowledge. No subject was too obscure, no document too minor. Among those who worked at the library were some of the greatest minds of the ancient world. Aristarchus of Samos, who suggested that the earth revolved around the sun. Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy. Herophilus, a pioneer of anatomy, and Hypatia of Alexandria, a mathematician and philosopher. Much of their work has been lost, because their writings disappeared along with the library itself. How was it lost? The tragedy is that there was not one single moment of destruction. The loss of the Library of Alexandria was a series of events: fires, wars, political shifts, and religious changes that together erased it from history. One of the first major blows may have occurred in the year 48 before the beginning of the Common Era, when Julius Caesar laid siege to the city. To defend himself, he ordered ships in the harbor to be burned. The fire spread and, according to some sources, damaged or destroyed part of the area that included the library. Others claim that the library survived that event. Later, under Christian rule in the Roman Empire, many texts considered pagan were neglected or destroyed. In the year 391, under Emperor Theodosius I, pagan temples were banned, and the Serapeum, which housed a secondary library, was destroyed by Christian mobs. This marked another critical loss for the intellectual heritage of Alexandria. Then came a final, devastating blow. In the year 642, during the Arab conquest of Egypt, a famous but likely legendary account says that General Amr ibn al-Az, following an order from Caliph Omar, destroyed the remaining scrolls. The quote often attributed to the Caliph: "If the books contain the same as the Quran, they are unnecessary." if they contain the opposite, they must be destroyed, is probably not historically accurate, but symbolically represents the final disappearance of the library. What was lost? Almost everything. Today, only fragments and scattered references remain, quotes in later works, mentions in writings that happen to survive. The vast majority of the library's contents are completely gone. The names, ideas, and discoveries of thousands of authors are lost forever. What was in those scrolls? What discoveries were made centuries before their time? What medical knowledge, forgotten languages, philosophies, histories, or scientific methods were erased from the record? We may never know, and perhaps that is what hurts most. Why does it still matter? Because the Library of Alexandria was more than a building. It was humanity's first serious attempt to preserve all knowledge in one place. This fall reminds us that knowledge is fragile, and not just in the past. Even today, we face the danger of losing information through war, neglect, censorship, or digital decay. Creation alone is not enough. We must also protect what we know. Today, on the same site where the ancient library once stood, the modern Bibliotheca Alexandrina stands as a tribute. But no reconstruction, no matter how noble, can bring back what was lost. The Library of Alexandria remains not just a symbol of what we once achieved, but also a warning of how easily it can all disappear. It is a monument not to what we know, but to what we could have known.